Something impossible happens in Japanese homes. A Buddhist altar, Butsudan, where families honor their dead ancestors, incense burning before a statue of Amida Buddha, photos of grandparents who passed decades ago. 5 feet away, a kamadana, a miniature Shinto shrine, offerings of rice and sake to the household kami, the sacred spirits protecting this family. Ask them, which religion do you follow? They'll look confused. We are not religious. Meet Tanaka-san, 68 years old, living in a small Tokyo apartment. Every morning, she lights incense at her Buddhist altar, bows to her ancestors, then turns, claps twice before her Shinto shelf, prays for her grandchildren's success. She doesn't see contradiction. To her, this is simply being Japanese. Now look at Japan's national census. 70% of Japanese practice Shinto, 69% practice Buddhism. That's 139% of the population. The CIA World Factbook noticed this anomaly. Scholars call it the Japanese religion paradox. But what if it's not a paradox at all? What if Japan understands something about Buddhism that the rest of the world forgot? For 1,400 years, these two religions weren't separate. They were one, a synthesis so complete that most Japanese couldn't tell where Buddhism ended and Shinto began. Then in 1868, the government tried to rip them apart, violently. Historians estimate over 40,000 temples destroyed, a 1,000-year fusion burned to ash. And what happened next reveals 3 profound Buddhist truths: that Buddhism is designed for fusion, that attempts at purity are never neutral, someone always profits from them, and that the real Dharma lives in hearts, not institutions. This isn't a story about Japanese history. This is a story about what Buddhism actually is, when you strip away the politics and look at how it really works. 12 centuries before Tanaka-san lit that incense, one of her ancestors discovered something that would change how we understand Buddhism itself. Here's what should make the Japanese fusion impossible. Buddhism teaches anatta, non-self. There is no permanent soul continuing after death. What you call self is a constantly changing process, an illusion you cling to. The entire goal of Buddhism? Liberation from the illusion of self. Shinto assumes your ancestors' continuous kame, spirits you honor at household altars. They're still present, watching over the family. You pray to them, make offerings, maintain relationships with the dead. How do you reconcile there is no self with honor your ancestors? You don't. These are philosophical opposites. Buddhism seeks liberation from existence, from samsara, the endless cycle of rebirth. The goal, nirvana, complete cessation, escape the world entirely. Shinto celebrates existence, life, nature, community. The goal isn't escape, it's harmony, participation in the sacred rhythms of this world. The world isn't suffering to escape, it's sacred to honor. Buddhism is universal. The 4 noble truths apply everywhere: India, China, Japan, Sri Lanka. Same Dharma, same path. Shinto is particular. The kami of Mount Fuji are not the kami of Kyoto. Each place has its own sacred presences. You can't practice Shinto in India. It's tied to Japanese soil, local, untranslatable. Buddhism came from renunciation, a prince who abandoned his kingdom, monks who take vows of celibacy and poverty, leaving the world to find truth. Shinto came from farmers, people who needed good harvests, priests who marry, have children, celebrate fertility and life, staying in the world to honor it. On paper, these are opposites, incompatible at every level, and yet. 552 CE, Buddhism arrives in Japan from Korea. A golden Buddha statue, monks, sacred texts. Within 200 years, they're fused completely. By 750 CE, when Japan builds the great Buddha of Nara, the largest bronze Buddha statue in the world, the consecration ceremony is performed by Shinto priests, invoking Hachiman, the kami of war, as the protector of this Buddhist monument. The Buddha statue, blessed by Shinto kami, and nobody sees a problem. Fast forward to 1200 CE. One of Tanaka-san's ancestors, a minor samurai. Before battle, he performs purification rituals at a Hachiman shrine, Shinto, asking the war god for victory. After battle, he meditates in a Zen temple, Buddhist, reflecting on impermanence, honoring the fallen. Morning, Shinto; evening, Buddhist. Same man, same day. No contradiction. His children are born at a shrine, Shinto birth rituals. When he dies, Buddhist funeral, Buddhist memorial services. Ask him, "Are you Buddhist or Shinto?" He'd look at you like you're insane. "I'm Japanese. What kind of question is that?" The Japanese discovered something crucial. The contradiction only exists if you think religions are supposed to be exclusive. But what if Buddhism was never meant to be exclusive? What if fusion isn't a Japanese mistake, but Buddhism working exactly as designed? What if Buddhism is built for fusion, designed to adapt, engineered to wear different masks in different lands? Let me show you the architecture. The Japanese didn't break Buddhism by fusing it with Shinto. They understood something about Buddhism that takes most people years of study to grasp. Buddhism is designed to adapt, built for it, engineered for fusion from the very beginning. Let me show you how. There's a parable in the Lotus Sutra, one of Mahayana Buddhism's most important texts. A father's house is burning, his children are inside, playing, unaware of the danger. He shouts, "Get out! The house is on fire!" They don't listen, they're having fun. So he changes tactics. "Come outside, I have toy carts for you. A deer cart, a goat cart, an ox cart." The children run outside, they're saved, and when they get outside, the father gives them something even better than toy carts. He gives them the truth. Safety, liberation. The father lied about the carts, but the lie saved their lives. This is Upāya, skillful means. The Buddhist teaching the truth wears different costumes depending on who it's trying to save. That the Dharma doesn't insist on one form. It meets people where they are. In India, Buddhism spoke the language of Hindu philosophy, karma, rebirth, yogic meditation. It used concepts Indians already understood. In China, Buddhism adopted Taoist vocabulary. The Dharma became the way. Meditation became sitting and forgetting. It wore Chinese clothes. In Tibet, Buddhism absorbed Bone Mountain gods, made them Dharma protectors, put them in Buddhist temples, gave them new roles in a Buddhist cosmos. And in Japan, Buddhism slipped into the masks of kami. This isn't corruption. This is Upāya working exactly as intended. The Buddha himself taught this in the Pali Canon, When asked why he taught different things to different people, he said, "Just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does my teaching have one taste, the taste of liberation, but the methods vary according to the capacity of beings." One taste, many methods. Japan took this principle further than anywhere else, not because they misunderstood Buddhism, because they understood it deeply. So when Japan fused Buddhism with Shinto, they weren't breaking the rules. They were proving they understood Buddhism better than most. Between the 11th and 15th centuries, Japanese Buddhist schools developed a teaching called Honji Suijaku. Honji means original ground, the fundamental reality, the true form behind appearances. Suijaku means manifest traces, the local, temporary, adapted forms that reality takes. The theory claimed kami are not separate from Buddhas, they are Buddhas, appearing in Japanese form. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, Japan's most important kami. She's actually Vairocana Buddha, the cosmic Buddha of infinite light, same being, Japanese face. Hachiman, the war god, he's Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of infinite compassion, appearing as a warrior deity because Japanese people needed that form in that moment. This wasn't informal blending, this was formal theology, taught in Buddhist schools, written in texts, practiced in thousands of institutions. Historians have a word for this era, Shinbutsu-shūgō, Kami-Buddha combination. The fusion wasn't considered mixing two religions. It was simply how you practiced religion in Japan. Buildings called jinguji, shrine temples, embodied this fusion physically. Picture approaching one, you walk through a torii gate, the distinctive Shinto archway. Beyond it, a Buddhist pagoda, then a main hall housing both a kami shrine and Buddha statues. You smell incense, Buddhist, and sake, Shinto. You see orange torii gates, Shinto, next to 5-story pagodas, Buddhist. A priest performs rituals, chants sutras, claps for kami. Same person, same building, same day. Ask him, "Are you Buddhist or Shinto?" He doesn't know how to answer. The question doesn't make sense. It's like asking, "Are you Japanese or do you speak Japanese?" By 1500, thousands of these jinguji existed. Many historians estimate over half of major shrines had Buddhist temple components. But here's what makes this Buddhist philosophy not just syncretism. Honji Suijaku is based on a core Mahayana teaching, the two truths. Ultimate truth, emptiness. All phenomena lack inherent existence. Everything is interdependent, fluid, without fixed essence. Conventional truth, the world of appearances, where distinctions exist, where kami are kami, and Buddhas are Buddhas. Honji Suijaku says, on the ultimate level, kami and Buddhas are the same emptiness taking different forms. On the conventional level, they appear different to serve different functions. Both truths are valid, neither cancels the other. This is sophisticated Buddhist philosophy, applied to an entire culture. This is also a perfect example of pratyasamutpada, dependent origination. Buddhists teach nothing exists independently. Everything arises through relationship, through mutual dependence. Ask, what is Japanese Buddhism without Shinto? You can't answer. They co-arose, co-evolved, each shaped by the other for 1,400 years. Ask, what is modern Shinto without Buddhist influence? Again, impossible to separate. The categories only make sense in relationship. This isn't corruption, this is interdependence, one of Buddhism's core teachings, expressed culturally. For 1,000 years, this wasn't considered mixing two religions. It was simply reality, ultimate and conventional truth, dancing together. But the Japanese didn't just fuse them theologically, they divided them functionally. Shinto handles life, beginnings, celebration, the world of growth and vitality. Birth ceremonies, Shinto shrine. Coming-of-age rituals, shrine. Weddings, mostly Shinto. Harvest festivals, shrine. Business success, pray to Inari, the kami of prosperity. Buddhism handles death, endings, transition, the world beyond this life. Funerals, over 90% Buddhist. Memorial services for ancestors, Buddhist temples. Visiting graves, Buddhist cemeteries. Preparing for your own death, Buddhist meditation. This isn't random, this is each tradition doing what it does best. Shinto focuses on purity and pollution. Birth is pure, death is polluting. So Shinto handles the pure moments. Buddhism handles the polluted ones. But pollution in Shinto isn't sin. It's natural. Death pollutes not because it's evil, but because it's powerful, dangerous, requiring special handling. Buddhism, with its detailed afterlife cosmology, its practices for navigating the bardos, its rituals for honoring the dead, steps in where Shinto steps back. The result? One religious ecosystem, two specialized departments, both necessary, neither complete without the other. Think of it this way: Shinto gives you tools for life, Buddhism gives you tools for death. Why would you refuse either? A warrior needs both. Purity rituals before battle to summon life force, meditation after battle to prepare for mortality. Different contexts, different tools, same person. One of Tanaka-san's ancestors in 1400, a village headman. Morning, purification at the shrine before meeting with officials, purity for public business. Evening, reading sutras at the temple, preparing his mind for death, honoring his parents. He never wondered which was real. Both served different purposes, both were necessary. The Japanese weren't confused about having two traditions. They understood something the rest of the Buddhist world sometimes forgets. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to views, to concepts, to rigid categories. Japan refused to attach to Buddhism as a fixed category. They let it flow, merge, transform, and in doing so, they practiced non-attachment at a cultural level. This is the genius of Japanese Buddhism, not that they broke the rules, that they understood the rules so deeply they could follow them in ways nobody expected. Buddhism fused with local traditions everywhere: India, China, Tibet, Korea, Southeast Asia. But nowhere else created formal theology declaring them identical. Nowhere else built thousands of hybrid institutions. Nowhere else made fusion the default for an entire civilization. Why Japan? Here's the deepest reason. Japanese culture is extraordinarily comfortable with multiplicity, with layered identities, with truths that coexist without resolving into one. A modern Japanese company uses both lifetime employment, Confucian loyalty, and brutal meritocracy, capitalist efficiency. Same company, both systems operating simultaneously. Japanese art blends traditional aesthetics, tea ceremony, calligraphy, and ultra-modern innovation, anime, digital culture. Both equally authentic expressions of Japanese creativity. Japanese people navigate multiple identities. Local. Each prefecture has distinct culture and pride. national, all Japanese, both true at once. This isn't confusion, this is cognitive flexibility at a cultural level. The Western mind, shaped by Aristotelian logic's demands. A thing is either A or not A. It cannot be both. The Japanese mind says, why not both? Context determines which is relevant. This is basically the two truths doctrine lived culturally. Ultimate truth. Everything is empty of inherent existence. Distinctions are provisional. Conventional truth. Distinctions exist and matter in context. You still have to navigate them. Japan didn't need Buddhism to teach them this. Their culture already operated this way. Buddhism just gave them philosophical language for what they were already doing. So when Buddhism arrived, teaching all phenomena are empty but conventionally real. Japan said, yes, obviously, that's how everything works. This cultural predisposition was enabled by two practical factors. First, Shinto had no defenses, no sacred texts with commandments, no founder claiming exclusive truth, no centralized authority, no theology saying, kami alone are real. Shinto was practice, ritual, relationship with local sacred forces. Buddhism arrived with texts, philosophy, moral framework. Shinto didn't see Buddhism as competition. It saw Buddhism as filling gaps Shinto never tried to fill. Second, Japan had no empire to defend. China used Confucianism to legitimize imperial authority. Maintaining Confucian orthodoxy meant maintaining civilization itself. Buddhism threatened that. Japan, weak emperors. Power belonged to shoguns, then regional warlords. Nobody needed to defend Japanese orthodoxy because there wasn't one centralized power defining it. Buddhism could flow freely, merge with local practice without threatening state ideology. The irony, when Japan finally did develop strong central power in 1868, the first thing they did was try to separate Buddhism and Shinto, violently. The fusion happened so completely because it wasn't foreign to Japanese thinking. It was familiar. For 1,000 years, it worked perfectly. And then politics intervened, because while Buddhism teaches non-attachment, institutions cling. While the Dharma flows freely, governments demand borders. While truth wears many masks, nationalism requires purity. What happened next is one of the darkest moments in Buddhist history, and one of the clearest teachings about what happens when power meets religion. By the 1850s, Japan faced a crisis. Western powers had forced their way into Japanese ports, gunboat diplomacy, unequal treaties, the threat of colonization. Japan's response, the Meiji Restoration, 1868. Overthrow the shogun, restore the emperor to power, modernize rapidly, build a nation-state strong enough to resist the West. But nation-states need national identity, clear boundaries, symbols of unity, a story about who we are versus them. And Japan had a problem. Their religion was foreign. Buddhism came from India, through China and Korea. It was universal, transcendent, not uniquely Japanese. Shinto, though? Shinto was pure Japan, indigenous. The emperor claimed divine descent from Amaterasu, the sun goddess. Shinto myths made Japan sacred land. So Meiji ideologues made a decision: separate Buddhism and Shinto, elevate Shinto as the essence of being Japanese, create state Shinto, a nationalized religion, to unify the population under imperial authority. March 1868, the government issued an order, Shinbutsu-bunri, the separation of kami and Buddhas. The official policy clarified the distinction between kami worship and Buddhist practice. The implementation catastrophic. All Jinguji, those shrine temples that embodied fusion, must choose. Become purely Shinto shrines or purely Buddhist temples. No more mixing. Buddhist monks serving at shrines must become Shinto priests immediately, or leave. Abandon your vows. Marry, or lose everything. Remove all Buddhist imagery from Shinto shrines, statues, bells, sutras. Anything Buddhist must go. What followed was called Shinbutsu-shūgō. Abolish Buddhism and destroy Shakyamuni. The government never officially ordered violence, but they didn't stop it, and their rhetoric made it inevitable. Across Japan, zealots attacked Buddhist temples. Within just a few years, historians estimate over 40,000 temples were destroyed or closed. Almost half of Japan's Buddhist institutions gone. Buddha statues melted down, priceless sutras burned, temple bells sold as scrap metal, monks beaten in the streets. 1868, one of Tanaka-san's ancestors, a Buddhist monk, serves at a Jinguji in Kyoto. His family has served there for 300 years. Inside the main hall sits a wooden cannon statue, hands worn smooth by centuries of prayers. The library holds sutras from 1150. The bell was cast in 1260. April 1868. Officials arrive. You have 1 week. Become a Shinto priest or leave. He refuses. These aren't separate. They never were. You're asking me to cut myself in half. 3 days later, they burn his temple. The cannon statue dragged outside. Oil poured on her, set ablaze. 700 years of accumulated devotion. Smoke. The villagers watch. Some weep. The zealots warn. This is foreign corruption. You're being liberated. The sutras used as kindling, the bell sold to a British merchant, shipped to London, melted down, turned into nobody knows what. 7 centuries of sacred history erased in 3 days. The monk becomes a farmer, dies 20 years later, never enters a temple again. Multiply this by tens of thousands. On paper, this is religious reform. Return to pure Shinto. In reality, it's a case study in 3 Buddhist truths. First, attachment to institutional forms creates suffering. Japanese Buddhism had become wealthy, powerful. Some temples owned vast estates, wielded political influence. They clung to their position. When threat came, they couldn't adapt. The institutions that survived for 1,000 years, destroyed in a few years. Even a tradition preaching impermanence, anicca, can cling to its own forms. Second, whenever someone sells you pure original faith, you can be certain politics isn't far behind. The pure Shinto they claim to restore, it never existed for 1,000 years. Shinto and Buddhism were fused. The real tradition was fusion. State Shinto, invented in 1868, claimed to be ancient. It was actually a modern nationalist ideology dressed in religious language. The emperor's divinity, exaggerated beyond anything historical Shinto claimed. The mandatory shrine worship, never existed before. The use of Shinto for military nationalism, completely new. They claimed to restore purity. They actually destroyed authentic tradition and replaced it with invented orthodoxy. Third, the Dharma survives in hearts, not institutions. The government destroyed 40,000 temples, separated Shinto and Buddhism by law, created state Shinto as national religion. In 1945, Japan lost World War II. State Shinto was dismantled. The emperor renounced his divinity. And what happened? They tried to purify Japan's religion. In exchange, they got an invented tradition that led to catastrophe. Within a few years, they had erased 1,400 years of religious history. Or had they? Because you can destroy buildings, you can rewrite laws, you can force institutional separation. But there's something you can't destroy. Something that survives when everything else burns. Let me show you where the Dharma actually lives. (1945), Japan surrenders, American occupation begins. One of their first acts, dismantle state Shinto completely. The Emperor's New Year's radio address, January 1st, 1946. The Ningen Sengen, Humanity Declaration. The ties between us and our people have always stood upon mutual trust and affection. They do not depend upon mere legends and myths. They are not predicated on the false conception that the Emperor is divine. The God Emperor, invented in 1868, ended in 1946. Shinto and Buddhism were both classified as private religions, neither receiving state support, complete institutional separation, enforced by law. The Jinguji were gone, state Shinto was dead, the fusion, officially, was over. Or was it? Walk through Japan today, 2025. Ask someone, are you religious? Most say no, I'm not religious. But watch what they do. New Year's Day, over 100 million people visit shrines, then many visit Buddhist temples. Birth ceremony, Shinto shrine. Wedding, often Shinto, sometimes Christian, rarely Buddhist. Funeral, over 90% Buddhist. Memorial services, Buddhist. Visiting graves, Buddhist temples maintain the cemeteries. They don't see this as contradictory. They're not mixing religions. They're simply participating in life's rhythms. The 139% paradox is real. 70% practice Shinto. 69% practice Buddhism. The same people, counted twice, because they do both. The institutions divorced twice, first in 1868, then in 1945. But the people? They never did. Tanaka-san in her Tokyo apartment, 2025. She doesn't know about Honji Suijaku, never heard of Shinbutsu Bunri, has no idea her ancestor was a monk who lost everything. But every morning, she lights incense at her Buddhist altar, then claps at her Shinto shelf. She inherited 1,400 years of fusion, not in her head, in her body, in her habits, in the way she moves through the world. This reveals where the Dharma actually lives, not in institutions, not in buildings, not in official theologies or government policies, in hearts, in homes, in the small rituals people do when nobody's watching. You can destroy 40,000 temples, you can ban fusion by law, you can invent new orthodoxies and enforce them with violence. But you can't legislate what happens in a grandmother's apartment when she honors her dead and prays for her living. 3 Buddhist truths this reveal. First, form is emptiness. The Heart Sutra teaches, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The temples were form, beautiful, sacred, centuries old. They were destroyed. Form proved to be empty, impermanent, dependently arisen, subject to causes and conditions. But the practice survived because it wasn't attached to the form. It moved into people's homes, into small gestures, into the space between waking and sleeping. This is emptiness as form. When you're not attached to one form, the Dharma can take infinite forms, even the form of a grandmother's apartment, a small altar, a quiet prayer. Second, the middle way applied to culture. The Buddha taught the middle way, not extreme asceticism, not extreme indulgence, the path between. Japan found the middle way between religious exclusivity and formless relativism. Not only Buddhism, not only Shinto, and not even equal amounts of both. A third thing, a synthesis creating something new, functional specialization within one ecosystem. This is the middle way, applied not to personal practice, but to civilization. Third, multiple perspectives are simultaneously true. Mahayana Buddhism teaches two truths: ultimate truth, emptiness; conventional truth, the world of distinctions. Both true, both necessary, neither cancels the other. Birth ceremonies, Shinto shrine. Coming-of-age rituals, shrine. Weddings, mostly Shinto. Harvest festivals, shrine. Business success, pray to Inari, the kami of prosperity. Funerals, over 90% Buddhist. Memorial services for ancestors, Buddhist temples. Visiting graves, Buddhist cemeteries. Preparing for your own death, Buddhist meditation. Both true. Context determines which matters. This isn't confusion. This is sophisticated understanding that reality depends on perspective, that truth is context dependent, that you can honor ancestors and understand non-self. Because ancestors exist conventionally, and non-self is ultimately true. No contradiction. Most people spend years studying Buddhism to understand this intellectually. Japan embodies it culturally, lives it daily, without thinking about it. Japan's innovation, the ability to practice paradox without resolving it, to hold multiple truths, to refuse the demand for purity, and the survival of fusion despite 2 forced divorces proves something the Meiji government didn't understand. You can't kill a practice that lives in hearts. You can only destroy the forms it temporarily takes. If you imagine Buddhism as one single thing, pure, unchanged, orthodox, Japan is where that illusion shatters. But the shattering reveals something beautiful. First lesson: you think your identity is one thing, one religion, one nationality, one role. But look closer. You might meditate with a Buddhist app, make a wish on birthday candles, say knock on wood for luck, and still whisper a prayer at a family dinner. On a census form, that's confusion. In reality, that's being human. We contain multitudes. Different contexts activate different parts of us. Japan is just honest about it. Most of us carry multiple traditions too. We just pretend we're only one thing. Second lesson: whenever someone says return to the pure original faith, check who's saying it and what they want. Pure Buddhism doesn't exist. The Buddha taught for 45 years, adapted constantly. Different teachings for different people. After his death, Buddhism split into schools, then sects, then lineages, each claiming authenticity, none identical to what the Buddha taught. Buddhism in India absorbed Hindu concepts, in China absorbed Taoist language, in Tibet absorbed Bon deities, in Japan absorbed kami. Every living tradition is fusion, every pure form is recent invention claiming ancient authority. The Meiji government claimed to restore pure Shinto. What they actually created? State Shinto, invented in 1868, used for nationalism, led to war. Purity is never neutral, someone always profits from it. When someone demands you purify your practice, your belief, your identity, ask, who benefits from my purity? What are they trying to control? Buddhism teaches, let go of views, don't cling to fixed positions. Even the Dharma is a raft to be abandoned after crossing. Japan took this seriously, refused to cling to pure Buddhism. Let it flow, merge, transform. And in refusing purity, they understood Buddhism more deeply than most. Third lesson: The Meiji government destroyed 40,000 temples, forced separation by law, created official orthodoxy. It didn't work. Because the real Dharma wasn't in the temples, it was in people's homes, in small gestures. You can destroy every Buddhist institution on earth, every monastery, every temple, every text. If even one person still sits quietly and watches their breath, the Dharma survives. The Dharma isn't buildings, it's practice. And practice happens in hearts. This is what Japan proved twice, when the government tried to kill fusion, and the people quietly kept doing it anyway. Japan is often described as having two souls, Buddhist and Shinto. The truth is messier. For most people, those souls were never separate to begin with. They were always one rhythm, one breath, one way of moving through the world. And maybe that's the deepest Buddhist teaching of all. The categories we use to divide reality, Buddhism and Shinto, religious and secular, pure and mixed, are provisional, conventional, useful sometimes, but not ultimately real. What's ultimately real? The old woman lighting incense, the breath moving in and out, the love for grandchildren, the honoring of ancestors. That doesn't need a category. It doesn't need permission from institutions. It doesn't need to be pure. It just needs to be practiced. And in that practice, whether you call it Buddhism or Shinto or something else entirely, the Dharma lives. Not because of institutions, despite them. In the space between the categories, in the both and, in the 139%. That's where truth actually exists. You came here thinking you'd learn about Japanese religious history. What you actually learned, that Buddhism is designed for fusion, that purity demands always have politics attached, and that the real Dharma lives in your daily practice, not in institutions claiming authority. Japanese Buddhism isn't unique because it's different from real Buddhism. It's unique because it reveals what Buddhism actually is when you strip away the politics. In the next video, we will explore another radical adaptation. When Buddhism entered China and created Chan, the tradition that became Zen, another fusion, another transformation, another proof that Buddhism's genius is flexibility. If you've been watching this channel, you already know Buddhism isn't one thing. We've explored the three schools, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, each radically different. We've examined Zen, Pure Land, Tibetan Buddhism, each adapting to its culture. Japan takes this adaptation to its ultimate conclusion, and in doing so, shows us what Buddhism has always been. Drop a comment. Do you practice multiple traditions without realizing it? Where's your 139%? Subscribe for Buddhism that doesn't demand you choose sides, for teachings that honor paradox, for wisdom that meets you where you are. Because that's what Upāya means, that's what Buddhism always meant. And Japan never forgot.